Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Washington Institute's Policy Forum on Arab public opinion about some of the most urgent crises and foreign policy issues facing the world right now. I'm Dave Pollock. I'm the Bernstein Fellow at the Washington Institute, and I'm delighted to have with me two expert panelists for this session. I have Kat Cleveland, also at the Washington Institute, as chief editor of Fikra Forum and an expert on many different regional issues, and my collaborator on polling recently. And from Baghdad, direct right after his iftar, Ramadan iftar, I'm delighted to welcome Munqith Dagher, who's one of the top Arab pollsters in Iraq and elsewhere in the region, and a very significant political analyst for political leaders in his own country of Iraq and elsewhere in the region, and also regional director of polling in the Middle East and North Africa for Gallup International. We all have lots of data to present, and we're going to try and do it quickly so that we have about half an hour for your questions and comments. And the way that works is, if you have a question or a comment, there are two ways to send it to us directly to me. One is to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen on the right-hand side. Just type it in and I will get it. Another is, if you're on our live stream, especially, you have the option of emailing your question to policyforum@washingtoninstitute, all one word, .org. policyforum@washingtoninstitute.org. You can email your question and that will also come directly to me. So without further ado, let me start out by saying that the data that we are presenting here is brand new. Almost none of it has previously been released or published in any form. And we're happy to give you the first crack at it in this special session. The data that Kat and I will be sharing with you are from polls that were done in 7 different Arab countries in March, just before the beginning of Ramadan, by a very experienced, credible, and completely independent, non-political, commercial survey research firm that I have worked with for over 30 years. And I believe that these data are very credible, very solid, methodological. Each country included a sample of 1,000 people selected randomly by geographic probability procedures and interviewed in person, face-to-face, with strict assurances of confidentiality. So I have to say that I think these are the best data available anywhere from any of these countries. What I'm going to do is to focus on, first, the 3 major Gulf Arab countries in which these surveys were done just last month. And those are Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait. And what we found is that in all 3 of those countries, the publics, surprisingly, value their ties with Russia as much as with the United States. Half or more in each one of those 3 Arab Gulf countries now feel that the United States is unreliable. And 2/3 don't see anything positive about the US government's quest to sign a new nuclear deal with Iran. At the same time, around 3/4 in each one of these Arab Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait, have a negative view of Russia's military actions in Ukraine. And over half in each country blame Russia's military invasion for the recent rise in food prices in their own country. Now let's take a quick look at how these publics rate the United States in comparison, not just with Russia, but also with China. In both Saudi Arabia and the UAE, Russia and China have now edged out the United States in perceived importance. In Kuwait, that question yields a three-way tie, with around 45% saying that Russia is important, that China is important, and that the US is also important. In sharp contrast with those numbers, no more than 16% in any of these three neighboring Arab Gulf states say that good relations with Iran are important to their country. These rankings are all the more surprising because many more people in each country pick the United States rather than Russia or China as the country best able to protect us from our foreign enemies. That's a direct quote from the question that was asked in the survey. The problem, however, is that American credibility on that score has eroded. The poll posed this question for people to agree or disagree with. Quote, "We cannot count on the United States these days, so we need to look more to other countries like Russia or China as partners." In each of these Arab Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Kuwait, the narrow majority now agree with that statement. Now, I want to turn very briefly to two other countries before I turn the screen and the microphone over to Kat and to Munqith, who will show you graphic demonstrations of some of these new findings. The two other countries I want to talk about are not in the Gulf, but on the other side of, in the Levant, Egypt and Jordan. Neighbors of Israel, officially at peace with Israel for a generation or more, and supposedly friends of the United States. But I have to say that our latest findings from those two Arab countries present a very mixed picture. On the one hand, you have a majority in Jordan and a plurality in Egypt who say that good relations with the United States are still important to their country. But in Egypt, Russia is almost on a par with the United States. And I'll come back in a moment and try to explain why that might be so. And it's not because people in either one of those two Arab countries like what Russia is doing in Ukraine. And it's not because they like Iran. In fact, the vast majority in both of those Arab countries, as in the Gulf, do not like Iran. But they're not very enamored these days of the United States either. And I have to say that the most surprising and troubling result, to me at least, from all of these surveys has to do with popular attitudes in Egypt and Jordan toward Israel and toward this new process of normalization with Israel that has reached into the Arab Gulf and as far away as Morocco and even Sudan in North Africa. What we found in this latest poll done just a few weeks ago is that only 10% of the public in both Egypt and Jordan say that the Abraham Accords between Israel and these new Arab peace partners in the Gulf and in North Africa are a good thing. And only 10% of Egyptians and Jordanians say that it's okay for their own country and their own people to have business or other contacts with Israelis today. This is a discouraging result. And as I talk to officials here in the United States, in Israel, and in the Arab world about these numbers, they all conclude that this is something to be concerned about behind the headlines about Ukraine or Iran or Russia or China. And this is something that everyone who cares about peace in the region needs to pay more attention to and hopefully to do something about. So with that, I will turn the microphone over to Kat Cleveland, please.
Hi, Corey, can you bring up the slides, please? Fantastic. So I will be walking you through a few key data points that David has mentioned in more detail. And I'll be drawing on our new polling interactive with David's polling data that spans from our most recent polls from March 2022 all the way back to January 2015. The screenshots that we've pulled from the interactive allow us to compare the most recent data with previous data sets and also allow us to break down this data into a number of demographic cross-sections. Specifically, I'll be looking at the cases of attitudes towards Iran and Russia and what this can tell us about how current events are or aren't influencing views on great power and regional competition in the Arab world. One notable brief point when it comes to these cross-sections is that we've broken this data down by age and by religious affiliation. And what we found is that there's a surprising lack of difference in attitudes between those respondents who are 18 to 29 years old on the one hand, and those who are 30 or over on the other. And this means that when it comes to questions about protests against corruption in one's own country, or on the questions of a myriad foreign policy issues that we've looked at, there isn't a statistically significant difference between younger and older respondents on almost any question that we've looked at in the past few years. In contrast, breaking down the data by religious group can provide additional nuance into how we understand the impact of Russia and Iran's messaging and actions in the region, as well as the relationship between Sunni and Shia perspectives in various Arab countries, as well as the similarities and differences between the same religious denomination across the Gulf and across the Arab world as a whole. Slide, please. So one of the things that we've looked at is how important Iran is in terms of relations with Iran. And what we found, as David mentioned, is that it's generally unpopular to have relations with Iran, or it's seen as not very important. So across the board, with the exception of Lebanon and to a lesser extent Bahrain, most respondents do not see relations with Iran as particularly important. And this is especially the case when we look at answers to the same question on the United States, Russia, China, or Turkey. Moreover, the difference in responses between Sunni and Shia respondents is not so different. This is also the case when we've looked at certain specific issues when it comes to various foreign policy issues with Iran. So for example, the slide that we have here is a question about the attempts for the United States and Iran to renegotiate a nuclear deal. And as you can see, there's a large minority who see this as very or somewhat positive, but the majority of respondents did not see a renewed nuclear deal as a positive thing. And this is the case whether we were polling Sunni or Shia, Bahrainis, Kuwaitis, Saudis, or Emiratis. There's a small difference, but it's not a large difference. In contrast, slide, when we asked a question related to Iranian messaging on its role in intervention in the Arab world and the Palestinian cause, we see attitudes are much more deeply divided. We asked respondents to look at the statement, wherever Iran intervenes, it hurts the local Arabs and doesn't help the Palestinians, and say if they agreed or disagreed with this idea. And we can see in Bahrain, there's a 57% difference in how Shia and Sunni respondents approach the statement. And we also see significant differences in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, in addition to Lebanon. So drilling down into these data sets also highlights the relationship between the Russian invasion of Ukraine and its larger military role in the region. Slide, please. Oh. Corey, is it stuck or? There we go. Oh, there we go. Okay, so if we look at this slide, it appears that the responses to the Russian military actions in Ukraine are remarkably uniform across the 7 countries that we've polled. The large majority of each country's respondents see the invasion in the negative light. However, there are a few interesting variations when we drill down further. Slide, please. So the first drilling down comes to the data coming out of Lebanon. I've mentioned before that Lebanon can be an outlier in the ways in which its various religious demographics approach a number of issues. And in this case in particular, we actually find that a majority of Lebanese Shia respondents do in fact support the Russian invasion of Ukraine. This is the only group that we've seen where a majority support the actions in Ukraine. In contrast, the Lebanese Sunni respondents rejected the invasion more strongly than the respondents we saw in any other country, and 80% say that they have a very negative view of Russian actions there. Slide, please. And when we drill down further and we look at Lebanon's entire confessional system, we see that most Lebanese, aside from Lebanese Shia, have a very, very negative view of Russian military action in Ukraine. And this helps demonstrate the profound impact that Russia's involvement in Syria has had on Lebanese attitudes towards Russia and the ways in which it's polarized Syria's neighboring country. And this is especially the case in contrast to the rest of the Arab world. The second point that I want to look at is the ways in which Russia's invasion of Ukraine hasn't appeared to significantly impact Arab respondents' views of the value of Russian military power in the region itself. Slide, please. So back last November, we asked respondents to give their views on the increase in Russian arms sales in the Arab world and to several Arab countries in particular. And if we look at responses, we see that attitudes are split. And while a majority saw this in unfavorable light in Egypt, Jordan, and Qatar, views were more split in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Lebanon. And what we've seen now in this most recent set of data is that there is continued interest in Russian involvement when it comes to military issues. Slide, please. So we asked for respondents to rank the United States, Russia, and China, as well as other countries, just the option of other countries, when it comes to a series of roles that these states can play in the region. And as David mentioned, while the United States is still seen by a plurality of respondents as playing an important role when it comes to soft power issues, so we looked at which country was most likely to promote human rights and democracy, and also which country respondents were most interested in visiting, studying at, or working in. What we found is when we asked which country can best help protect us against foreign enemies, most respondents were split between valuing the United States and Russia as the country that could best do this. And here, as David mentioned, Egypt stands out. The majority of respondents, or rather the plurality, were more interested in Russia as being able to protect against foreign enemies. But as you can see, there's a close parallel between the amount of respondents that thought that the United States was best suited for this role and the amount who thought that Russia was the best suited for this role. So slide, please. We also see this interest in armament when we asked what was the most important aspect of Russia's policies towards the respondents' countries. So as you can see, they were provided with 4 different options. And while helping us resolve regional conflicts diplomatically was also a popular view, a plurality of respondents in most countries focused on providing advanced weapons for our armed forces. So as you can see, there is still a popular interest among many respondents towards Russian military involvement in the region through arms sales. And as David mentioned, there is an increasing trend that we're seeing of people looking towards Russia or China as opposed to the United States. So what we can also draw from this based on our past data is that the Russian invasion in Ukraine hasn't really had a major impact on most countries' populations' views of Russian involvement in the region. So Munqith is going to speak a little bit more about that. So I will turn it over to him and he'll be able to show us some other really interesting data that he has. Thanks.
Thank you, Kat. Thank you, David. I'm so happy to be with you this evening in my time zone. It's afternoon, your zone. I will speak briefly about the U.S. strategic position in the region and in Iraq specifically. As you all know, that United States has been involved heavily and intensively in this region for the last 4 decades. Maybe there wasn't any other region in the world as MENA, US involved in it, and it had many, or it went through many wars, involvement, etc., etc. And yet, United States right now is losing a lot of its credibility and its reliable role from Arabs and Iraqis' point of view to United States role in the region. And I can say that after the invasion to Iraq, there was a clear deterioration and decline in the attitudes toward Iraq, toward the United States in Iraq. In the first stage, it was seen as by a good part of Iraqis, like especially, let us put it like majority of Shias and most of Kurds, as a good thing happened to them to replace and to change the regime. But after that, things started to decline due to many historical mistakes and strategic errors made by the US administration at that time. But the real turning point was on 2011 with the irresponsible withdrawal from Iraq without and leaving Iraq to a real chaotic, especially after 2014. I mean, the period between 2011 and 2014 was good till the things started to become very bad after the Syrian issue and the walk away from or the Obama administration decision not to involve in Syria. Anyway, this became now a history, but recently the irresponsible withdrawal from Afghanistan also had a lot of negative. The main point that I want to highlight today is that United States is losing its soft power in the region. This is very clear. The US strategic, global, and regional competitors are not doing much to win the race toward the hearts of the people in this region. They are not doing a good job. As you hear from Kat, people are not supporting the Russian invasion to Ukraine. Yet they are not condemning this invasion. And when you ask any Arab or any Iraqi about this, he will immediately answer in a comparative way and tell you that, well, what about United States? So there is always the United States there as the reason behind this decline, or let me put it in a better way, behind this rise in the popularity or favorability of Russia and China, the main two competitors in the region. They are just using the lack of a clear US strategy toward the region. They are using the big mistakes made by different administrations, whether this administration, whether Trump administration or the Obama administration. So they are using these big mistakes to gain more land and to gain more influence, as we will see in the charts that I will show to you. While US still has, if I will put it between two brackets, social capital favorability among the people in the region, this capital is eroding quickly. And there should be a new approach to the region. As you will see in the charts, United States is still looked at by the people here as the super military power, and not the superpower, or not a superpower. It's the military power. And this is what has been seen because of the war involvement or the military involvement in the region for the last. United States for decades was a dream for Arabs. It is a dream of democracy, it's a dream of new life, it's a dream of everything. These good software ingredients, soft power ingredients are not used properly. And this will be shown in this on these slides, which I will share it with you. Where just a moment to. So as you can see here, I'm comparing between China, Russia, United States.
Just a second, sorry, your presentation isn't showing.
Is it? Okay. Yeah.
Corey, can you put it up on the screen from your end?
I have an older version. I don't have the most updated one.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, Munqith, try again.
Let me check. How can I do that? Share screen. Yes, I think now.
All right. It
Yeah.
says you've started screen sharing. Let's see if that really is true. There it is. There it is. Okay. Thank you. Go ahead, Munqith.
So as you can see here, China is the big winner in the last few years. Unfortunately, I was not able to, or I didn't have time to show the time series.
That's okay.
Yeah, but as you can see here, now this is very fresh. China favorability is much higher than United States favorability, or of course, Iran and United States. Iran is the least favorable in power in the region among Iraqi or between among Iraqis. Yes, United States in the second least. Russia is in the third, and United States, China is the big winner, as I said before. Now, going to the who has the positive influence in Iraq, as you can see here, that United States was seen on 2020. 40% of Iraqis saying that has positive influence. This is declined to 33 right now, this month. In comparison with let us in China. In China, it was 29 on 2021, and now it jumped to 33. Russia also, it's almost stable for the last two years. So, as I said before, they are not doing a lot to win the hearts of Iraqis. But United States, with its policy harming its assets, its capital, its favorability in the region due to the wrong politics and wrong steps made by different administrations. As you can see here, and as I mentioned before, United States is seen as the most powerful armed force. So when we ask about to provide military support to defend Iraq against foreign invasion, which countries can be a good partner? United States, for sure, is the most credible partner for Iraqis to give a military support in comparison with China and with others. But if we go to the economic support, as you can see, China and United States is going neck by neck, head by head. So after all that investment by United States, we will not forget that United States lost almost 5,000 US soldiers, tens of thousands of wounded, or even more than $2 trillion in its war and its invasion to Iraq. Yet, when it comes to the economic benefit or the economic partners for Iraqis, China is even have the same favorability as an economic partner among Iraqis. And again, this is not because Iraqis like China. Historically, this is not the case. And China and Iraq, it's a symbol of bad trademark of bad everything in comparison with United States. But again, I will highlight the same points and going back to it. The bad policies of United States during the last decade, especially after 2011, yes, the Syrian case and the withdrawal from Iraq, the things started to decline sharply. And Iraqis can not forget what Mr. Obama mentioned during his last interview with Atlantic when he was about to leave the White House, and he said that Saudis and Iranians should sit together to arrange the issues of the region. So it's as saying that all other countries are not should not be involved. The main two powers in the region which should take care of the region are Saudi Arabia and Iran. And this was a big mistake for Iraqis. This was a big humiliation for them. Now, as you can see, for the cultural ties for Iraq to encourage greater cultural ties with different countries, United States jump on the top. United States is still the most favorable destination for immigration, for instance. No one will tell you that I would like to go to China, to immigrate to China or Russia. Every single one will tell you, those who are deciding or those who decided to immigrate, they will tell you that United States. And when you ask them why, they will say that it's a better place, human rights, a better future, etc., etc. And yet, these valuable assets are not used properly. We are still facing huge problems when we submit for visa, for instance, to the United States. In comparison with Russia and with China, you can get it at the same day. And by the way, whether United States decision makers knows or not, this is a region which the key of its mind going through its hearts. So you have to win the hearts of the people here to go through to their minds, and to win their hearts, you have to treat them in a proper way, face honor, respect, and to do that. Or if you do that, of course, the Iranians are the most skillful people in this in respecting or showing respect to showing respect to others. I will leave it to
Okay.
now, and I'm sure that there will be a lot of questions about this
Great.
issue.
Thank you very much, Munqith. Let's go back to take the slides off and go back to, right, and thank you. I want to talk, first of all, before I start answering questions or fielding questions, I want to just note one important thing, Munqith, from your presentation, which is very interesting and important, I think. And that is that even though the United States is not doing so well in Iraqi public opinion these days, Iran is doing even worse. And it's very striking that for the last 3 years in a row, fewer than 10% of the Iraqi public, which is a majority Shia population, fewer than 10% of Iraqis have a favorable view of Iran on any of the areas that you talked about. Generally, military relations, economic relations, even cultural relations. It's a remarkable story that needs to be better understood in the United States by people who sometimes think that Iraq is a lost cause because Iran has so much influence there. It's not really the case at all, especially at the popular level. Very, very important findings that you just presented. Now, I'm going to turn to the questions that have come in. And just to repeat, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen on the right-hand side, or you can send questions on email at policyforum@washingtoninstitute.org. So the first question I have is an excellent one from Ariel Gold. Where can we access the poll results after this webinar? And I'm going to ask Kat to answer that question because we have a great answer to that question. Kat.
Yes, as of now, you can access our polling interactive, which has all of these details and more. You can go to Fikra Forum at the Washington Institute website and click on any of David's polling articles and access it through there. Or you can also go to the Washington Institute social media where we've been tweeting out the link to these polling interactives. So
can you just repeat the exact addresses where people should go?
So you can go to the WashingtonInstitute.org and go to Fikra Forum. And on our homepage, our top article right now is David's article on Jordanian polling, the results from the Jordanian polling. And the interactive is accessible in that article. Alternatively, you can go to the Washington Institute's Twitter account, and we'll be tweeting out the link to the polling interactive directly.
That's fantastic. Thank you. And I want to just tell you that this new interactive polling data platform that we are now making public for the first time today will be available to all of you and to your colleagues and friends and to the media and to government officials in the region and right here in the United States and elsewhere around the world permanently. And you will be able to find all of our data going back all the way to 2014, and not just to find it, but to play with it if you want, to make up your own charts and graphs and to show your own trends over time or your own demographic breaks by age or by religious sect or by issue. And I think it's a terrific new addition to the Washington Institute's resources that are now available to all of you and to everyone, completely free of charge. All right, so now the second question. How much of a factor, this is from Gerald Thompson, in the US credibility as a defender was the lack of US military response to the missile attacks by Iran or Iran's proxies on Saudi oil facilities and the Houthi attack on the United Arab Emirates? And the answer is almost certainly, based on the circumstantial evidence of timing, it was a significant factor. I think we know from polls that were done even before those attacks that US credibility was already not terribly strong in the Gulf, but it got even weaker after, as you say, the US failed to respond forcefully and promptly to the attack on Aramco and to the attack by the Houthis directly on civilian targets, actually, in the United Arab Emirates. So we can see that the US credibility declined further, I would say by 10 or 15 points on average in those countries after that failure to respond in our latest poll. And today, unfortunately, the United States is believed by the majority in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates to be not very reliable as a security partner for their country. I hope that answers that question. The next question is from Ann Moisen. I hope I'm pronouncing that adequately. It seems that countries in the region still seem to believe that might makes right and that security is someone else's responsibility, not their own responsibility. They rely on outside powers for their security. My own answer to that goes a bit beyond the data, because the data don't really answer those questions directly. But I would say on might makes right, no, I don't think that's accurate. I think if you look at how people around the region view, for example, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, they don't like it. They don't believe that Russia had the right, just because it has the might, to invade a neighboring country. And you have really a very solid majority, 3/4 in most cases, of the people in each of these countries that we just polled and that Munqith polled, who disapprove of the Russian invasion or military action, as the question called it, trying to be neutral about it, who disapprove Russia's move against Ukraine. So might does not make right in their view. Now, on the second point, my answer is yes, actually. I think in general, in most of these countries, the people tend to believe that their own country cannot protect itself by itself, that it needs to rely on outside support. And so the question then becomes, which outside power is best able or willing to provide that security shield? And I think that this is probably an accurate reflection of the reality in the region. The countries in the Arab Gulf are not able, and they know that they're not able, both at the government level and at the popular level, to defend themselves completely against a major power that is their neighbor and potential threat like Iran, which is much bigger and stronger. And the countries in other parts of the region, I think that's also true of Iraq. I think it's also true of Jordan or Egypt, who feel that they face potential threats both inside and outside their own country from armed groups of different kinds, militias, terrorists, neighbors, failed states on their borders, and so on. And they understand that they need outside help to defend themselves. At the same time, because people and governments in these countries feel less able to rely on the United States or any other outside power the way they used to in the past, they have in recent years taken matters more into their own hands. And that's why you see, for example, Saudi Arabia or the United Arab Emirates intervening militarily on their own in neighboring countries, whether it's in Bahrain or in Yemen or as far away as Libya. That's why you see Egypt and Jordan very interested in buying weapons from advanced weapons for their own armed forces from a wide variety of countries, not just the United States, but France, the United Kingdom, even China and Russia, because they do understand that while they cannot defend themselves entirely on their own, they need to have a significant military capability in case their outside partners turn out to be not as reliable as they would like. The next question is what to make of Jordan, Egypt, and Iraq's alliance with the Ukraine-Russia war, especially with the latest poll survey. This is a question from Razan Nwairan. I have to say this. I don't see that Jordan, Egypt, and Iraq are allied with Russia in Ukraine. It is true that they have been reluctant, as also in the Gulf, to impose sanctions against Russia, but they are not positively supporting the Russian invasion of Ukraine, not diplomatically in the United Nations or in their official statements, and not in any practical way with weapons or fighters or anything else. So they are trying, even though they don't like what Russia is doing in Ukraine, they are trying to carve out for themselves a kind of neutral space in which they don't support Russia, but they don't actively support Ukraine or its friends either. And that, again, I think reflects what you see in the poll, which is, no, they don't like what Russia is doing in Ukraine, but they still feel at both the popular and the government level that they need to have an option, at least, to be on good terms with Russia, which is an increasingly influential power in the region, as with China as well. And so if China is trying to stay neutral in this in order to keep its options open, that seems to be, for these Arab governments, at least so far, also what they see as their preferred option. It's not because they like the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I emphasize that point. It's because they don't see other partners as completely reliable, and so they feel like they need to preserve the option of better relations with Russia and with China and with other countries, and not to ally themselves completely against Russia or with the United States and its allies. And that is a fact of life that the surveys demonstrate is true, not just at the government or elite or military level around the Arab world, but even also at the popular level. The last question, no, it's not the last question. Thank you all for submitting these great questions. Another question from Robert Cohen, could we see the polls about Israel? And the answer to that is the same as the answer that Kat gave just a few minutes ago. Yes, you can. And you can see the polls by going to Fikra Forum, which is the blog that Kat and I run at the Washington Institute, and going to the interactive polling data platform. And you can also see analyses of the polls that we have produced on Fikra Forum over the last 7 or 8 years that include many, many polls about Arab attitudes toward Israel, normalization with Israel, the Abraham Accords, and so on. Next question is from Ehab Galal. Many thanks for your interesting talk in Arab polls. Thank you, Ehab. My question is how the Arab state-owned and private media have covered this war, and how is it covered by social media? Wow, that is a great question. And it goes beyond the data in the surveys themselves, but I'll try to answer it anecdotally from my own direct personal experience as a talking head on Arab media in Arabic about the Russia-Ukraine war every single day for the last month and more. And what I can tell you is this, the Arab media have different approaches to this, depending on their political views, depending on what country they're broadcasting from or to, depending on if they're pro-government or pro-opposition. But in general, I would say that the Arab media have taken what I would call a pretty balanced view of the Russia-Ukraine crisis. That is to say that, and I'm not saying that this is necessarily a good thing, but they are not taking a clear position, generally speaking. They are inviting typically guests to speak from both Russia and the United States. That's me and others in Arabic, and the Russians have pretty good Arabic speakers, and I'm sad to say pretty good propagandists who can speak fluent Arabic and try and justify the Russian invasion of Ukraine as best they can to that important audience. And so the Arab media have tried to present both sides of the question. On social media, as usual, the views on social media are more extreme. They tend to be, I would say, without a systematic analysis, I'm reluctant to draw very firm conclusions, but they tend to be very skeptical of everybody. And whether it's of American statements, of Ukrainian statements, of Russian statements, of their own government statements about what's going on, the Arab public, especially the youth segment, and especially the ones who are active on social media, are distrustful of everybody and everything. And they think And I see Munqith, you're nodding your head in agreement about this from your own perspective out there in Baghdad. They tend to think along conspiracy theories. They tend to think along the lines that everything they're hearing is slanted and not the whole truth at best. And so they question all of the information and all of the arguments that are being made on both sides of the Russia-Ukraine war. Okay, the last question that I have, and we're almost out of time here, is sorry, from Razan again. Sorry, I just noticed that the word impact wasn't in the question. Meant the impact of the Russian-Ukraine war on the alliance that emerged. Okay, would the invasion have a negative impact? The question was what the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war would have on the region. It did not specify what part of the region or what aspect of the region or what country in the region, or whether we were talking about economic or security or diplomatic or social or refugees or other kinds of impacts. And we deliberately left that question rather general so that the respondents could decide for themselves what they were most concerned about or interested in, whether positively or negative. And the answers were, as I said, 3/4 negative. But we also asked a more specific question about the impact of the Russia-Ukraine war on food prices in their own country. And in each country, there was not a large majority, but a majority of people who felt, and again, this is at the grassroots level. These are national samples of everybody, men and women, young and old, Sunni and Shia, educated and less educated, rich and poor, and all over the country, not just in the major cities. And in each country, the majority of people tended, or close to it, tended to feel that the Russian military actions in Ukraine, as the question put it, were to blame for the recent rise in food prices in their own country. And they're right about that. They are, I think it's fair to say, perceiving that very accurately. And that also helps tend, I think, to explain why, even though many people in these countries still value relations with Russia overall and are still skeptical about their ability to rely on the United States these days, they understand that what Russia is doing in Ukraine is having a direct negative impact on their own daily lives in the form of the food crisis that is affecting all of these countries. Now, are there any last questions that people want to send my way before we conclude? With thanks to all of you, and thanks to especially to my fellow panelists and to Corey Francis for handling the technical aspects of this webinar, and of course to the Washington Institute and its trustees for their support for all of this research and for bringing it to you. Any final questions? If not, I am going to say, since we've used up the full hour, thank you to all of you for your interest and your participation and your excellent questions. I hope I've answered them to the best of my own ability. If you have further questions, please feel free to contact us through the Washington Institute website, and please go on our brand new, amazing interactive polling data platform at Fikra Forum and see more details and play with the results yourselves. And once again, I thank you for your interest. I thank my fellow panelists, Kat Cleveland and Munqith Dagher, all the way in Baghdad. I'm wishing you, Munqith, and all of your colleagues and kin around the region a Ramadan Kareem. And I hope to keep in touch with all of you in the future about these and other important polling results that we will be publishing for all of you to look at in the next few weeks. Thank you once again. Have a wonderful day.